What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to the gray area with your host, It's That Kid Greg. For this video, I want to talk about cultural appropriation, the pros of it, the cons of it, and what we should do about it. With all that being said, let's get started. So, cultural appropriation, what exactly is it? Wikipedia defines it as the adoption or use of elements of one culture by another culture. Seems pretty cut and dry if you ask me. But Wikipedia also talks about the controversy behind cultural appropriation. Mainly how minorities feel like majorities use cultural appropriation to take things that were looked down upon and make them popularized for the mainstream. Think rock and roll being called slave music before white people popularized it, or how twerking was seen as trashy before Miley Cyrus started doing it, and then all of a sudden you had white suburban house moms twerking in order to exercise that. And this really sucks because you have groups that are essentially treated lesser or marginalized, so to speak, have these things that they hold to themselves that may not be particularly held dear, but they are their own, and then they are taken by other groups and made popular while completely devaluing what the thing actually was in the first place. But there is an upside to this. Let's look at twerking. Twerking was popular for a small amount of time, relatively speaking, and has slowly faded out of the mainstream. However, it's still popular in Black and Hispanic dance clubs for, every once in a while if a girl wants to show her stuff, she'll twerk it out. The same goes for things like rock and roll. Rock and roll was the biggest music genre in the world for a while, and now it is, while it's still around and it's still relevant, it certainly doesn't have its cultural pull from back in its heyday. But the one thing that bugs me in particular about all this is the assumption that only white people can appropriate parts of other people's culture. But this isn't the case. Let's take a look at the case of Bonita Tyndall, a black student who harassed and accosted a white student in the hallways for wearing dreadlocks in his hair. Now, people might look at that situation and say, well, yeah, she's standing up for her culture. That white kid has no right to wear dreadlocks. Dreadlocks is a strictly black hairstyle. But what if the roles were reversed? What if this was a black girl with straightened hair who was being harassed by a white girl? Oh, there would be cries of, "That's so racist!" and "How dare you!" But is this not the same situation? And I saw more than enough people sticking their heads up to defend Miss Tyndall when she committed this act, which was not okay in the slightest. That's what I'm trying to convey here. Because at the end of the day, people have freedom, at least in this country, to do as they please with themselves. That includes wearing their hair straight or wearing their hair in dreadlocks. It's part of our way of life, and taking that away is very, very dangerous, and it is a very slippery slope, because once you start taking away small freedoms like that, you'll begin to start taking away larger and larger freedoms until we wonder where our freedom went in the first place. And on another note, the whole reason why somebody would choose with their free will to adopt part of somebody else's culture like this young white boy did in dreading his hair is because he was probably exposed to it. Another huge thing that nobody seems to want to address is that when two cultures are constantly forced to stay in the same place together, they will blend into each other, they will bleed into each other, so that parts of one culture will merge with parts of the other culture and vice versa. I swear there was a name for this. Cultural diffusion. We're going 9th grade global history in this one. According to Wikipedia, cultural diffusion is the exchange of ideas, styles, technologies, religions, languages, etc. between individuals, either within the same culture or from one culture to another. When people bring their culture to somewhere new, or they create something new, other people will be drawn to it if it appeals to them. It will bring them in like honey with flies. And if this little piece of culture, this little aspect of culture is good, it will spread and become part of the wider culture, the societal culture as a whole. A good example of this is algebra. Strangely enough, we're bringing math into this too. First global, then math. Algebra originally started with the ancient Babylonians, who used it for simple calculations and writing. It was then later passed on to the Greeks, who expanded upon it and added to it, making it more viable to use with other situations that the Babylonians wouldn't have thought of at all. From the Greeks, it then went to the medieval Islamic people, who greatly enhanced it and refined it and turned it into this entire sphere of study that exists today. You can literally get a doctorate in algebra and continue studying algebra to the day that you die. And that's because it was passed on from culture to culture, being added to and refined until it was this huge, humongous, worldwide thing that most of us could not live without. Crazy. That's the power of cultural diffusion at work. But because the Babylonians created it first, or the Greeks added to it first, or the ancient Islamic people refined it and made it this amazing discipline, would it be considered cultural appropriation if somebody who is not of those backgrounds were to use it? I don't think so. And I know most people don't think so. So why does this seem to pass on to things like hairstyle and music? All of these things contribute to a wider culture that spans society and human history. And leaving other people out of it stifles that and keeps it from growing. It bothers me a lot that a lot of these times where I see people crying, cultural appropriation, seems to just be people adopting cultures that have diffused into each other. And of course there's a huge double standard that is at play here. Halloween costumes like geishas are considered cultural appropriation, but I have yet to see someone claim that a costume of Elsa, who is based on a story about a Nordic ice princess, as cultural appropriation of Nordic heritage. It seems very silly to me to pick and choose what's appropriation and what isn't. The problem even persists in the gaming community, which is already under fire from pretty much every angle. In the game Smite, you can play as various mythical gods and heroes throughout history and culture all over the world. One in particular that had huge amounts of people upset in the Hindu culture was Kali. They did not want her in the game. They said this was racist, it was cultural appropriation, it was dishonoring, etc., etc. But I haven't seen anybody saying how Hercules was racist, or Thor was racist, or anybody else in that game, or Horus was racist. Anything like that was seen as a cultural appropriation, and yet she was picked out of the bunch because those people in particular felt ticked. Or let's look at a more recent game, Overwatch. Overwatch recently added skins to the game for your character to match their own cultural heritage and background. You have things like Pharah, who has an Egyptian look to her. You have Symmetra, who also takes the shape of a Hindu goddess. And you have like Zenyatta, who has like the whole Buddhist thing going around with orbs floating around his neck. And there was a huge outcry that this was cultural appropriation at its finest, and that they were reducing these figures into stereotypes. And I have yet to see anyone complain that Lieutenant Surge from the original Pokemon games was a bad stereotype of an American person. He was literally a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white American, it says it in the game text, American who was war-hungry and whose entire gym puzzle involved digging through trash. If that's not shitting all over somebody's culture, I don't know what is. Now, the biggest complaint involving cultural appropriation is that these aspects of these cultures are taken without consideration as to what they mean, where they come from. But the thing that boggles my mind is that if you see people interested in your culture and they want to take aspects of it, and you think that they should know more about it, why not take that opportunity to teach what you know? Even if it's not your culture, if you know about that culture, it should be in your best interest to teach them about that culture so that it can be better respected in the future, would it not be? I remember a discussion I had maybe last year with a friend where she said that the geisha Halloween costume was cultural appropriation and disrespected Japanese warrior heritage. Now this confused me greatly, and I asked her, how would dressing up as a hostess be disrespectful to warrior heritage? I then went on to show her what a geisha actually is and what samurai were and ninjas were and other types of stuff that I've picked up throughout my day, because I'm a big fan of video games and anime and manga, and so I have, through enjoying these media, picked up a lot about the Japanese and Asian cultures, at least in respects of what I like reading. And Japanese and anime culture is a perfect example of the good things that can come out of cultural appropriation. Here's an example of that with Goku. Goku is easily the most recognizable anime character of all time. So me being me and looking into things that I enjoy, I found out that Goku was actually based on Sun Wukong, the main character in the Chinese classic A Journey to the West. Dragon Ball's creator Akira Toriyama gained many inspirations from this Chinese classic and incorporated them into the lore and history of Dragon Ball. And most of that was thrown out with Dragon Ball Z, because then all the alien stuff was introduced, but the influences remain there. But that begs the question. Dragon Ball's creator Akira Toriyama is Japanese, and A Journey to the West is a Chinese classic. Does that mean that Akira Toriyama appropriated Sun Wukong, this Chinese character, in order to create Son Goku, a Japanese character, which, mind you, is the biggest icon of all anime, of pretty much all time in terms of anime? Maybe. And there's certainly an argument that you can put for that. But I know personally that I would have never found out about A Journey to the West and Sun Wukong if it was not for Goku and Dragon Ball, which I loved growing up. And because of that influence, now whenever I see references to Sun Wukong, it blows my mind how well it was done. For example, in Pokemon, which is one of the things I enjoy greatly, there's a Pokemon called Infernape, who is clearly a reference to Sun Wukong to me, with his ornate design and him being a monkey and understanding martial arts, and even down to his Japanese name, which is, if I'm not mistaken, Gokuzaru. And the Goku part of Son Goku is actually just the Japanese way of saying Wukong. Do you see how this all plays back into each other? And that's because Akira Toriyama liked this aspect of Chinese culture and decided to use it and spread it. And so did the creators of Pokemon, obviously. Culture spreading and growing is an inevitable process. And the people who inherit this culture, it is their job to inform others of what it is and how it should be treated and respected. Because if they don't, then the culture will wither away and die, and it will not be remembered. And I don't think anybody wants that. I think every person from every cultural background wants to see that culture flourish and be known to everybody and be treated with respect and dignity. And that cannot happen if that culture is kept hidden away where nobody can see it. So to the people who would cry cultural appropriation at seeing something that is paying homage or respect to something from their culture or culture that they greatly respect, I urge you not to picket and get mad, but to teach people and make them understand why this aspect of your culture is so important and the impact that it has had throughout history. Because that's how you make people more tolerant. Not by yelling and screaming, but by talking and learning. But that's just what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, I'd like to thank you for watching, and remember, nothing is black and white.